Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a first submission by Sarah of her horse Stella. Stella is a 6-year-old Lusitano. So it looks lovely in green wherever you are there in the world. Now, it was interesting that you said you put on a second side rein in your letter. I don't know if you were lunging with one side rein or whoever would have told you to do that, but you should always lunge with two side reins on a horse. If you just put an inside side rein on, all it does is really teach the horse to lean on the inside side rein. So you always want to have an outside side rein on as well, so that's the one that we want to get the horse to have contact with. So let's be sure we're straight on that. And the side rein should always be the same length. If anyone ever tells you to shorten the inside side rein, run, because that tells us right away that they really don't understand what you're trying to do on a lunge line. Because when the horse is bending, the inside side rein will actually be loose. It should be looser than the outside one. That is because the horse is bending correctly. Of course, it should be looser on the inside. So you should see the outside one, the slack taken up on the outside one when the horse is going correctly. So just be sure we have no difficulty there. Always two side reins. So you say you have a lot of difficulty getting this horse on the bridle. I can certainly see what I'm seeing here is this horse is very resistant to moving forward a little bit, or not very, but a bit. And she's very hollow, extremely hollow, and holding her neck. You can see how she's kind of turtling her neck back into her body and holding it up and kind of rigid. So this can be a little difficult. And she's moving. If you see how she's moving, how her hind legs are way behind her body, so she's really not underneath herself at all there. She's traveling very much with her hind legs sort of falling out the back. You can kind of see how her hips are what I will call tented, as they're starting to look peaked. Look on the hips, so that also tells you see there's a little bit of a hollowness behind the saddle that shows me that the horse has never been working over its back. So just looking at her right off the bat, that's what we see. A little bit of lateral work there. That's not bad, and certainly helpful for the horse. What I'd rather see you do there is just get the horse moving consistently. Oh, I see. Then you're hooking the outside side arm. No, yeah, absolutely never do that. Both side reins get hooked on correct length. That is not tight, but they should be just tight enough that the horse can't get its head all the way up, is where we want them. So by all means, from now on, just start with both side reins. And I don't know where you got that habit, but that's not one you ever want to get into, because, as I said, all it does is teach the horse like it was there. It wasn't helping her at all, but just getting her to grab hold of the inside rein. So much better now that you have contact on both sides. Now, but we can also see, even with the side reins there, you see how she's turtling her neck. She's pulling her neck back and away from the forward movement. So, yeah, she's got a long way to go to stretch down, and it looks like she's quite stiff there in that department. Now, the other thing, you talk about riding her. Let me just explain this. If you can't get the horse stretching correctly on the lunge line, there's really no point in trying it on the saddle. So my advice to you at this point would be to just not get on the horse at all until you get the horse moving correctly over its back on the lunge line. Because once again, once you add your weight, if the horse is already hollow, it's just going to be that much more difficult. You have very little chance of succeeding unless you're awfully good at this on a horse that won't stretch into the contact on the side reins. Because, as I said, once you add the weight, the horse's back has already dropped. It's only going to drop more and pull its neck further up. And as it's starting to do here, kind of breaking into the third vertebrae again instead of stretching out forward. What I mean is she's flexing in the wrong place at times in her neck. You see how her neck kind of goes up and then flattens out? So this horse would be, if you continued, doing this incorrectly, you would end up with a horse very, very broken in the neck, which is what we see with so many. But this is starting to look a little better now that you're going here, and she's trotting a little better and starting to move forward, so that's good. You could make her a little more active even than you are here. There you go, and that's starting to look pretty good. So, yeah, I think what you got to just remember is our cardinal rule. If you can't get on and stretch at the walk, there's no point in getting on. So you want to keep trying that. But once again, you want to get the horse really swinging and spend some time strengthening that back before you start to get up there and expect her to hold her back up while you're riding. But this is looking better. She's come a little bit down with her neck there a little bit, just by virtue of moving there. That's starting to look a little better, though very tight. So ultimately what we're going to want to do, as soon as she starts to stretch down, because these side reins are a little on the tight side, they're not going to let her stretch all the way forward. So she's going to have a tendency to crank over in the neck and not stretch forward and down, which is what we want her to do. But this is looking much better as you're going here. This is starting to look like something. Much better work. but she still needs to get much lower. So as she starts to stretch, and if you have to have the side reins this short, as soon as she starts to stretch like that, what you want to do is stop and let them out a hole, and let them, let her go like that till she stays soft and swinging into it, and then let them out another couple of holes until you can get her all the way out there, because we want her to stretch much further down and out than she's doing. She's just holding herself very stiff and kind of rigid. But that is certainly better. And once again, just seeing her there, once again, you can see how there's a dip behind the saddle. You can see how her hips, what I call tented, they're starting to look peaked, like there's a point on top of the hips. And that's from the horse simply not moving in its full range of motion, because it's so stiff, it's not really moving forward over its back. So it's never really developing over the top line. You can see even when she walks there, the bottom of her neck is very thick. So that tells you that she's kind of been stabbing her front legs and pulling along with the shoulders. Whenever you see a U-necked horse, that's basically what causes that, is they're traveling with the wrong set of muscles. I mean, certainly some horses are built a little bit that way from the beginning, but even ones that are built that little way, a little that way from youth, you can certainly turn them around and get them stretching correctly and develop the top line as it should be. But a lot of babies, it looks like you have some grass where you are, but here in California, and which is why I don't think we see as many horses being raised here, because so many people did it disastrously. You need pastures of grass for horses to grow up on, so they're moving all the time. And notice I say pastures of grass and not dirt lots. And unfortunately here in California we have dirt lots, so people think, oh, I'm putting my horse out to pasture, and when it's really just a dirt lot. And the horses, if you'll notice, they stand by the feed trough. So if there's not fresh green grass, they don't move around the paddock very much. They'll just stay in one place, and that's why it's so important for babies to have their necks down and out and grazing over the ground and moving around that way. That's what nature intended them to do, not stand in one spot and eat out of a manger with their heads up in the air. And that's another thing with these kind of horses, be sure that you are feeding off the ground. That is, you want to get, what I use is low round tubs that I can put on the ground as the horses stretch their necks down and out when they eat. You never want to hay mangers and all these kind of things. Anything that has a horse eating with its head up in the air is a bad idea, because it just exacerbates that stiffness of the neck. And of course, it doesn't, they're not intended to eat like that by nature. So just be sure you aren't doing it. All of those little things will help with a horse like this, So if you are feeding it in a manger, do not do so. Throw your hay in on the ground for it. But this is starting to look better. It's still not active enough, but the neck is starting to come out. I'd like to see you just stay with it longer. So what we'd like to see you do is just keep going there a little bit longer till you really get the horse into rhythm, rather than coming back so often to the walk. But really let the horse get there before you, that is, now she was starting to stretch. Now interestingly enough with her, she was looking better at the trot than she is here at the walk. She tends to come back to the walk, and then she sucks her neck back and really doesn't get herself swinging and active. Nice looking catch you got there. Brave. There you go, back into the trot. And you can see how, this horse is swishing its tail quite a bit. That tells me the horse is really, there's something about what's going on here that she's not very happy with. You may also want to check your saddle fit. And it's also a good idea, like with a horse like this, until you get it stretching, I would highly recommend just getting now that's looking much better. There you go, like that. Now we're starting to get some good work. You might be better off just getting a surcingle so you don't have anything on the horse's back. Obviously just put a surcingle with a pad under it. And then the horse isn't carrying the weight of the saddle as well. Because when they're swishing like that, there may be something, you recommended, or rather you talked about the fact that your horses might be a little footsore. And then you do have to be careful. I don't know where you are, though this trot is looking much better. The neck is starting to come out longer. That's getting to be more what we want. You didn't say whether your horses had shoes on or not, which makes a big difference. I mean, if you're working on uneven ground or out where there's rocks of any kind or whatever, you certainly should have shoes on your horses. Barefoot horses never really stand up to this kind of work, and especially if you had a really soft ring that had really great footing, you might be able to get away with that. I'm not saying that you do, I don't know, you didn't mention, but you did mention your horses were a little footsore, so be aware of that. And especially if you we're going from the winter to the summer. Very often what happens in areas, I grew up in Kentucky, and the ground there would be very soft all winter long, but as soon as the summer comes, everything hardens up, and we found very often if we kept riding on the hard ground after the winter and doing much of it, if we didn't give the horses a chance to adjust to that change in the footing, they would get sore. So you may find that be a little bit of your problem as well. So you kind of got the double whammy that you're working there, just out on the grass or on dirt, which there's nothing wrong with. Horses can certainly do that as long as they're not full of holes. I mean, as long as it's fairly consistent, you're fine. There can't be holes in it, however. That's where you want to watch out for, because if you have a lot of holes or a lot of rocks, you never get at the horse. The horse is always going to be uncomfortable about what it's doing because it wants to protect its feet. So you must be very careful about that. So what I saw there on the lunge line, you were just getting the horse to where you wanted it to be, and you should have stayed longer at that point and let the horse really get swinging over its back rather than coming to this work in hand work. So once again, as I suggest, I would suggest a few weeks of just lunging this horse till it really gets stretching the way you were starting to get pretty good there at the end of that. And once again, you'd want to, once he starts to give, start giving the rein, because we want the face of the horse to go down and out, not to be pulled back to its knees if the side reins are too tight. So be careful of that. Though that wasn't bad work in hand, I just don't think, she's still just staying rather stiff for you, that this is that useful for the horse. The lunge at this moment, the lunging work would be a better way to go right now. And when she really gets stretching on the lunging and sticking with that. And the other thing you may want to do with extremely stiff and hollow horses, the shambone can also be a better way to go if they're really resistant to stretching out. But what I saw there on the lunge line, I thought was at the end was getting there good. So that's where we want to get it to, but then keep it there for a while. Though you're doing a pretty good job here with the work in hand, it's a little slow, and she's not really stepping actively enough to do you a whole lot of good, but she is stepping away from the whip there, and you're doing a good job of doing it. You're a little forward on the horse's body. You should be doing that more back by the horse's shoulder, so you might want to go back and revisit my videos on that. You want to keep yourself at the shoulder of the horse so that you can keep the horse ahead of your leg, just like when we ride. So take a look at those. That's not bad, but as I said, at this point, that wouldn't be very useful for this horse. You would really be better off, spending more time. Right now, this horse needs to lunge for a while and really get stretched out. I mean, I would say till she comes out and just drops right down there. Then go back to riding, and you'll see that the horse will be much less resistive to the process. As I said, she does look, when we see her go there, she starts swishing her tail and pinning her ears back a little bit, which tells me something is maybe bugging her a little bit. As you said, it may be sore feet, it may be a bad fitting saddle that's rubbing her someplace that she's not quite happy with. Though some horses have a little pissier attitude, for lack of a better term, than others do, and just kind of a little more resistant to do the work, just the idea of making them move at all. But we usually find that there is some physical problem that's causing that. That is, are their feet sore? Are they sore somewhere else in the body? Is their back sore? Is the saddle not fitting right? So every time they move, it's pinching their shoulders. So be sure and check all of those things. But as I said, were it I would go back to just lunging this horse with just a surcingle for a while, till you really get the stretching correct, and then when you get on and ride, you're going to find that you have something to ride. Once again, if the horse is not strong, that's our cardinal rule. If you can't get the stretch in the walk and get the horse to really swing through, it probably isn't developed enough to ride yet and really have it be any of any real value for you. So just like we see here, as soon as now you're on, her back looks like it's collapsed underneath you. It looks more collapsed than it did before you got up there, and her neck is extremely ewe-necked and hollow. And she's not really swinging. Look how stiff her back legs are. You see, once you got on there, now her back legs kind of look like they're being sucked up and out of mud, and you're having a difficult time getting her to swing forward. So I would check that saddle fit just to be sure that that isn't somewhat of a problem. But I think more than anything, you probably just have a lack of development in the back, and that's your biggest problem here. A lot of the people who work Lusitanos and Andalusians think that they don't need to stretch because they've got that high head set, which this one doesn't particularly have anyway. But they think you just pull the neck over and there you go. But it doesn't work that way. Even the horses that are built with a higher set neck, that is, the neck comes straighter up out of the body rather than straight forward, that's always going to be a problem. So that doesn't mean anything. Once again, the head and neck position has nothing to do with whether a horse is on the forehand or not. It's whether the horse's back is up and it can step under the body. That's what changes the horse, whether it's on the forehand or not. For instance, when we see a saddle-bred horse, it's lifting its legs way up in the air, its head's way up in the air, but it's completely on the forehand because its back is completely hollow. That's why if you notice how a gaited horse, has no real moment of suspension. They move their legs a lot and they lift them up, but they're not pushing off the ground as they trot. So that's something we want to think about and just get an eye for. So this walk is improving a little bit as you're going here, but once again, I still feel the same way. I don't think this horse is strong enough to be doing the riding portion of this yet without some degree of resistance, because his back is still quite hollow on you. So, you want to get to the horse where, get to the point where you can stay in the stretch in each direction, say for 5 to 10 minutes at a time, where the horse just really gets in the zone and stays there. So be a little more consistent with that and more persistent, that is, that you keep her there for a while. And then once you get that, I guarantee you, when you get the horse where it will stretch, for 5 or 10 minutes on either side and stay there in the zone and move freely forward, because this horse never really looked like it was moving freely forward, even on the lunge line. At the very last there, you finally got her to stretch out a little bit, and that was much, much better. But by getting on, you're just really kind of undoing the good work that you did, because she's not strong enough, so all she's doing is really collapsing underneath you, which means she's going to resist the bridle. Every horse in the world that is hollow is going to resist the bridle, but people get on, they do side reins, they end up breaking the horse in the third vertebrae, and they get the horses behind the bit, and that's not on the, that's not correct either, though they think it is, So when you see horses' necks that go out and they flatten out on top, and this one does that a little bit, though it's not severe at this moment, but you really want to be careful of that, because it's an easy thing to do, and it gives people who don't understand what they're doing a false impression of what they're doing, because they see that neck, and that face is cranked over, and they think that's on the bridle. Well, that's not on the bridle at all. When we talk about a horse being on the bit, it's on the bit from the tail all the way through to the bridle, so to speak. That is, it lights up its top line consistently across the whole length of its top line. And yes, there are more than one muscle across the top line, but you don't need to think of that or know all of those names. You simply need to know that they all work together, like one long bicep. Kind of think of it that way, like you want to light up the entire length of the muscle, so to speak, from the tail all the way to between the ears, and then the horse will become light. So as soon as a horse, it's only that lightness and roundness that allows the horse to unlock the poll, so to speak, and for the poll and jaw to become relaxed. This is why we saw dressage riders going to tight nose bands and all the horrors, the roll cur and all the horrors that we've seen in dressage over the last 10 years. Because they're trying to force the horse's head over, and then they make them active, by beating them up and making them really crazy. That's not dressage. A horse that's tense is not doing dressage, period. The horse that's tense is never really going to work over its back well. So when you get that relaxation, which should be the hallmark of great dressage, once again, I always tell everyone at this point, go back and watch Charlotte Desjardins, who won the last Olympics, and look at her horse compared to any of the others and how it maintains collection, how soft it is, how it's flexed at the poll, not in the third vertebrae. And that should be our goal, and the horse is completely relaxed. And we see these horses with all this animation. Animation has nothing to do with dressage. I mean, a horse is going to be as animated, so to speak, and the gaits as expressive as the horse is really capable of doing. Not just flinging his legs around, like once again, like a saddlebred where they're just lifting their legs up. That looks impressive to people who don't know what they're looking at and don't understand, how the horse actually functions through the back. But once you understand that and you see these hollow horses snapping their legs up, you'll have a different view of it. This is a little better walk, but I say once again here, it's just kind of flat and hollow. It's not really going anywhere. It's much too slow. She still looks like she's just pulling her feet out of the mud behind. So this kind of walk is just not going to do you much good. In fact, just the opposite. And same thing, you would never want to go to the trot if you can't get the horse soft in the walk. There's no point. Like, this horse is still, now that walk is a little better, but it's still, see how the hind legs just kind of stiffen up and kind of fall out behind as you came around that corner there? So that just tells me the horse is really not working through its back, and it's got to do a lot more stretching work before you're going to be able to get a good working walk out of the horse. Remember, the term working gaits means working over the back. That's what people, they forgot to add in there. So people understand what working gaits are. It's not going a certain speed. Every horse has a different conformation and a different size. So the speed you're traveling at, that is the rate at which you're going over the ground, is different for every horse. A horse, one of them will be working over its back at one speed and one at another. But getting them working over the back is the important part. And that's what it means to be in a working gait, whether working walk or working trot or working canter. It means, the working gait means working over the back in the gait, when you say working gaits. So same thing here. This is just stiff, and you see she swishes her tail a bit. She's just not very happy about all this. So it's looking a little better there, but even going over those poles, you see how she kind of moves her legs in a very stiff kind of way, and once again swishing her tail. That just tells me she's not particularly comfortable here, and she's not really getting enough into a stretch for this to be valuable. Though at least I love the fact that you're not trying to force her on the bridle, at least, like so many people do. So just walking out like that. Now, if you could eventually get her to stretch out in the walk there, it would be okay mounted, but it's not coming quickly enough. Same thing going over these poles. And you know what? When we talk about going over poles and all of these kinds of things, and the gymnastic exercise that we can do, if the horse is not moving over the back, it's only going to harm the horse's legs. So you don't want to do any kind of pole work, any kind of obstacle work, just like with jumping. If you can't get the horse over its back, it shouldn't be jumping. If you can't get it over its back, it shouldn't be even walking over a pole. Because watch what happens every time that you try to do that. All the horse does is come up and just stiffen and kind of pull its back up, and the hind leg gets left behind. So getting the horse over the back is what guides our training. Once you understand this, that it's the foundation of training, and the foundation must be there all the time, just like building a house. If the foundation disappears, the house is going to fall down. Well, that's essentially what's happening here. There's no real foundation, so the house is kind of crumbling above. So just going back, as I said, to the work on the lunge line, get her stretching much more. When you can get the horse 5 or 10 minutes at a time to stretch into the contact. Once again, I would do it without the saddle on to give the horse's back a little more freedom. Because when you have a saddle up there, and even when they start moving, they can tend to bounce, and they can be a little tight at the shoulders and that sort of thing, which is something that you really want to work on. I can't see you close enough, to see really how that saddle fits. In your next video, if you'd like, you may add a little bit, take the pad off the saddle and just show me some close-up shots of what the horse looks like, of the horse's back without anything on it, and then put the saddle up there without a pad so I can see what it looks like in the position that it's supposed to be, and kind of give me some angle shots of it and that sort of thing, so I can just have a better idea of, some close-up idea of what we're dealing with here, because I really can't tell from this distance. And as I said, same thing here. While she's softening a little bit there, this walk is still pretty hollow. It's not moving anywhere. My father used to say, you see a hollow horse, and he'd say, you never make it to the next town on that horse, and that's exactly right, Well, this is looking a little better as you're going. Still not stretching enough, but it's looking a little freer than it was. But not so much that I would say this is worth doing, because she just needs to be much more stretched without the weight up there before you put the weight up there. Though it's looking better, and once again, I commend that you're not trying to force the horse on the bridle or anything like that, so that's good. I mean, you're not going to do too much damage. That's why in the old days, they went to standing martingales for people in the hunt field, because people who don't know how to ride, have no business taking hold of the mouth of the horse other than just to say stop and go. So the horse is certainly better off being left to their own devices. There's nothing worse than somebody who doesn't know how to put a horse on a bridle and understand all this trying to do it, which is, of course, why dressage today is such a mess, because we've seen so many people trying to do this who really didn't understand it, and they see the horses, just like the initial guy, the park seat comes from New York City, and the guy who was the trainer in New York City at the turn of the century was the one who invented it. We had a wealthy merchant class, and they wanted to ride horses, and he went to Europe and thought he could create dressage horses in 4 months. So that's how a lot of how this all started. We just didn't have enough educated people in this country, to help the horses that were here. And hopefully that's what, with the help of the internet, we're going to be able to do, is spread information, which is what people need. It's all about information. And when beginning to train your eye to see what's right and what's wrong. So once again, this walk, it's a little better as you're swinging along there. It's not terrible, but it's not round enough to be of really any value. It needs to be much more swinging and active than it is. But I think it's going to come pretty easily. When I see this horse, I think you actually got there pretty easily on the lunge line. You just didn't stay there long enough. She didn't quite get stretched enough, didn't quite get active enough over her back, to get where you want to get to make the riding much better. Though there you go, it's a little better. Now you see how, and compared to where we started, this walk is certainly looking better. But let's go back to the lunge, get that going correctly, because this, now look at that. Now that's the best she's been right there. That's how we need the horse to look when we get on the lunge line, stretching that whole length of the neck out and with the face in front of the vertical. So kind of keep that picture in your mind for next time. So once again, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Thanks for sending in your video. I hope that helps, and I look forward to seeing the next one. So again, just back to the lunging work. Do you get that lunging a little better? I think this horse is going to come around quite quickly once you understand that there's no point in doing things, in a bad way or in a mediocre way, so to speak, where you're not really getting it there. You weren't harming the horse walking it there, but she'll just get there a lot quicker if you'll take the time to really get her over her back on the lunge before we do anything else. So great work, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.